Hey, what's up, you guys? Dana White has just announced that the UFC will be returning back to Austin, Texas, December 2nd. And man, oh man, that's got to be the night of the lightweights. What a freaking card.
What's up, everybody? UFC is returning to Austin, Texas on December 2nd at the Moody Center.
We're going to break it all down, you guys. Please like the video, comment down below, and subscribe. So I want to say, like, about 2 weeks ago, Full Violence was reporting that the UFC were looking to do Bobby Green versus Dan Hooker and Arman Tsarukyan versus Beneil Dariush for a December 2nd Austin, Texas card. And, these rumors were being backed up by, credible sources also. But one thing that we did know was that, in fact, the UFC would be doing this December 2nd card, and it would be in Austin, Texas. It just wasn't sure what was the main event because, man, they were stacking that card. I mean, just to name a couple of names that have already been officially confirmed for that fight night card. It's a fight night. You got Davis and Figueiredo, you got Rob Font, Sean Brady, Kelvin Gastelum, Khalil Roundtree, and then now you're getting further additions like Dan Hooker, Bobby Green, Beneil, and Arman Tsarukyan. And man, oh man, that should just be the main card. I can't wait to see what we're getting for the prelims. And so, like I said, now we officially know that main event spot, which will be Beneil Dariush versus Arman Tsarukyan. And what a fight. I mean, what a fight. You got to give all the credit, right here to Beneil Dariush, because no one wanted to fight Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, we know that Dustin Poirier is one of the baddest men in the world. So is Michael Chandler. So is Justin Gaethje. I mean, that's like the deadly trinity, the trilogy right there between those three guys. But, I feel like none of those guys would accept a fight against Arman Tsarukyan. And I wouldn't say it's because they're scared, but it's strictly because of the name value. I mean, that guy doesn't present anything to them in a name value. The style isn't, that fun of a fight for them as well. He's not going to be as willing to, stand in front of you and trade. Arman is a very, very well-rounded fighter, amazing kickboxing, and then he mixes that up so well with his beautiful wrestling. I wouldn't put his jiu-jitsu, all there just because I feel like we haven't seen too much of it, but the wrestling credentials for him, I mean, he did so good in his debut fight against Islam Makhachev. Fast forward, later on in his career, I mean, that absolute banger of a fight that he had against Mateusz Gamrot, and now he's getting his first top 5 opponent in Beneil Dariush. And it's about time for Arman. I mean, if you're gonna feed him, lower level competition, I mean, he's shown that he's just absolutely gonna steamroll right past them. It wasn't until he fought Mateusz Gamrot, a more high level fighter, that things started getting more competitive for Arman, and that's what we want to see out of a young prospect. And I do feel that's another factor why these, top fighters won't take a fight against him, because he is young. He doesn't have so much to offer within the game, with him being only, in his 20s. But, you better believe that if he does get this win over Beneil Dariush, I mean, he's right in the mix. I mean, you're going to start talking about him versus Charles Oliveira, him versus, any of these other guys. And for Beneil, I mean, he was riding such a long win streak before he fought Charles Oliveira, and many people said, including himself, that he just didn't show up that night. We don't know how true that is. I mean, Charles just looked so good, levels above him during their fight, earlier this year in Canada. But, I don't think it's fair to write off Beneil just yet. I mean, he took a loss to, probably one of the greatest lightweights of all time, probably in many people's opinion, the greatest lightweight of all time in Charles Oliveira. Beneil has shown, I mean, if you throw him a young prospect in the game, I mean, he has shown that he's willing to absolutely derail their hype. And, Beneil has shown it. He's shown that if you throw him a young prospect in the game, that he will derail his hype, absolutely beat him in all areas. He did that last year in Abu Dhabi against Mateusz Gamrot, and Arman's an even younger fighter than Mateusz. So we shall see how this fight will play out. If I'm leaning toward one right now, I feel like off momentum alone, I gotta give it to Arman Tsarukyan. I don't know how Beneil will deal with that loss. I mean, plus also I feel like the UFC did him so dirty by giving him a Tausch in the first place. He shouldn't have had to fight that fight. He should have immediately been fighting a top 5 fighter, and then getting a title shot. It shouldn't have taken him that long. If you guys do remember, before that fight, he fought Tony Ferguson, and Tony Ferguson at that point was only coming off his loss to Gaethje and Charles. So that fight alone should have automatically given him a top 5 contender and then towards a title shot. He didn't have to fight the extra fights that he has been, and I feel like that all has to do with politics in the UFC. We all know that Beneil isn't the most marketable. He isn't probably the biggest star in the lightweight division, and when that type of stuff tends to happen, you do have to get these extra wins in order and in place. So the question is, will he be angry? Will he be like fed up? How is he gonna do fight week? For an early prediction, I gotta go Arman, just based off pure momentum, like I said. But I'm not a person that's going to count out Beneil. And then we go into the co-main event with Bobby Green versus Dan Hooker. Now, if you guys are fans of the channel, you know that Bobby Green is my guy. I'm always betting on Bobby Green. Absolutely fun fighter. I mean, in the last couple years, how he's rejuvenated his career by beating all these top lightweights, making fights competitive with Islam Makhachev, Rafael Fiziev. I mean, not really with Islam, we saw him, beat him in the first round, but you guys know what I mean. I mean, he's in these fights against these big high-level names as well. And it is no fluke, in his last fight, he stopped Grant Dawson 30 seconds in the fight. And man, I got a rant about it. At the time, Grant Dawson was number 10 in the world. Why is Bobby Green now ranked number 12? That makes absolutely no sense. Like, keep in mind, he stopped the number 10th guy in the world in 30 seconds. Why would you put him at number 12? Right in front of him is Jalen Turner, which, I mean, I could understand, Jalen Turner has fought, some good guys. But then you go into number 10, Rafael Dos Anjos. Like, Dos Anjos doesn't even fight at lightweight anymore. Why is he still ranked at lightweight, You know what I'm saying? That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, and you can't even complain about this to Dana. Like, he says that it's the media that control the rankings. So it's like, I ask you guys, media members, why is Dos Anjos a top 10 lightweight when he fights at welterweight? It just makes no sense. I almost cursed there, I don't want to get demonetized, I want the channel to actually grow, but it just doesn't make any sense. Bobby Green should absolutely be in the top 10. And then you also throw in the fact that this guy also finished Tony Ferguson in his fight before that. You also have to put in the fact of all the competition he's fought, competitive against Fiziev. He's been in there with Islam, he has wins over these really good guys. But now we get into this fight with Dan Hooker, and I mean, Dan Hooker is just an absolute veteran. I mean, he's been in there with everyone, man. And just I feel like a couple years ago, it was starting to look like his career was starting to decline. He was taking loss after loss after loss. Then he started to gain some momentum back. He even tried that move down to featherweight. Didn't work in his favor against Arnold Allen. No shame in that. Arnold Allen is one of the top featherweights, in the world as well. But like I said, starting to get some momentum back, starting to get good wins, beating Claudio Puelles, Nasrat Haqparast, and probably his most impressive win to date. I mean, that 3-round war that he had with Jalen Turner. I mean, going into that fight, I remember a lot of people saying, Jalen is just a better version of Dan Hooker, that he's just going to smoke him. Dan can't take a shot like that anymore, saying all these things about the Hangman. And then once the fight happens, I think it was the blonde hair that took over, the new tattoos. I mean, Dan Hooker took all the shots, head kicks to the face, marched him down, showed that he is in fact durable, even showing some new wrinkles, potentially, he's been working on his wrestling, that aspect seems to be going good for him, and also his, jiu-jitsu, just all around grappling, being just a little bit more aware and more technical, but also showing us that he's still that old, Dan Hooker that is willing to throw down with anyone. I mean, the wars he's had with Dustin Poirier, all the fun fights he's had. I mean, the guy's a veteran and he has such a fun style, and that's why I think this Bobby Green fight, I mean, wow, like, you got to think this has potential to be fight of the night, not only fight of the years, Not to mention, Dana White has also confirmed that this fight will take place over 5 rounds. You know, this co-main event will not be a regular 3-rounder. This fight will be a 5-round fight, you know? And, you know, really, truly thinking about it, I feel like in a 5-round fight, that's gotta favor Bobby Green. You know, his style of boxing, you know, the shoulder roll, popping his jab out, you know, popping it straight, you know, moving around. You know, I feel like that could really, you know, take a toll on a person over 5 rounds. I think the only time we've seen, of course, you got to think, I mean, the only 5-round fights that Dan Hooker has had, you know, the one against Paul Felder, I remember that happened in Auckland. That was a war. And then we had, obviously, the one at the Apex against Dustin Poirier. That was also, you know, a 5-round war. And in those 2 fights, we saw, you know, low-key, you know, Dan Hooker start to get tired as we got into the championship rounds. But like I said, those 2 fights were war. And if Bobby Green, you know, shows up the same Bobby Green he's been in his last like 10 fights, I mean, this is going to be an absolute guaranteed war. And I feel like you can expect Dan Hooker to fade. But like I said, with this new version of Dan Hooker with the blonde hair and the tattoos and the way he looked against Jalen Turner, and, you know, also bringing up some of his old past wins, like I said, against Claudio Puelles, I feel like you can almost certainly expect this fight to be competitive and a war at that. I mean, Dan Hooker also has knockout power. Don't think that he can't crack. I mean, we've seen that Bobby Green can be put out cold. You know, we saw his fight against Drew Dober. You know, you could absolutely guarantee that if Dan Hooker could land one of those 2, he could do the same, you know, effect. But I mean, what a pair of lightweight fights. And that's not even mentioning, you know, all the other fights that have been confirmed on, you know, this fight night card. I feel like it's definitely gonna, you know, hold up to be one of the best fight night cards, maybe of the year, but of all time. You know what I'm saying? But everyone, please, you guys, like the video, comment down below your thoughts. Let me know, you know, who you guys have in these fights, Arman Tsarukyan and Beneil Dariush, you know, Dan Hooker versus Bobby Green. And man, I'm just gonna throw it out there right now. If Bobby Green wins this fight, I don't want to see him outside of the top 10, man. I don't want to see him outside of the top 10. I want to see a top, you know, I want to see him at number 7, and I want to see him fight Dustin next. All right, that's all I'm gonna say. Just throwing that out there, you guys. Please, you guys, like the video, comment down below, and subscribe. Catch you guys later. Peace.